Were you in a golden cage? Were you in a daze? Did you even hear them say, was it like a dream? Were you in a golden place? Saw something strong, but a smile on your face. Ain't it strange after everything changed? If you go back that place, I would still feel the same. 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 I would still go write it out someplace you can't be found. And they take it all. You never know now. You never know what I'm saying. You never know what I'm dreaming. You never know now. You never know what's true. But don't know where I'm going. You never know now. You never know. It's all okay. Tell me it's all. Hey, tell me it's all. Tell me it's all. Tell me it's all. Okay. Tell me it's all. Hey, tell me it's all. Tell me that I'm fine. Go write it out someplace you can't be found. And they take it all. You never know now. You never know. You never know now. You never know. You never know. You never know. You never know now. You never
Hello. Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. It's my honor to welcome you to tonight's event, Constituting Community, Dreaming and Constitutional Abolition in honor of Trayvon Martin's life. A panel discussion with lawyer, writer, and organizer Derecka Purnell, minister and activist scholar Nyle Fort, Nailah Summers from the Dream Defenders, and editor-in-chief of the Cut Lindsay Peoples Wagner, organized by artists Alex Strada and Tali Karen. Before we get started, I want to go over a quick access check and share our land acknowledgement. Today, we have ASL interpretation services provided by All Hands in Motion. We also have auto captioning and live transcripts enabled. To make use of this Zoom feature, you can use the button on your toolbar marked CC to select captions and live transcripts. We will make time at the end for Q&A. You can add your questions to the Q&A feature. Please don't use the chat. We're going to try to reserve that to communicate with you, and also you can reach us there for any tech support. Before we get started, I want to ground us in our land acknowledgement. Queens Museum is located in Flushing Meadows Corona Park in central Queens. We would like to acknowledge the Munsee Lenape, Canarsie, Lekawe Rockaway, and Matinecock communities as stewards of the land and their past, present, and future generations. As both a museum of art and a historic site built on unceded Indigenous lands, Queens Museum recognizes the continual displacement of Native peoples by the United States and is committed to working to dismantle the ongoing effects of this colonial legacy. Queens Museum stands with all those advancing Indigenous resurgence and decolonization. We honor and pay respect to the Indigenous knowledge bearers that have and continue to live in deep connection to the land. We invite all of you to take action by devoting time to taking care of the land, whether this is by cleaning up your local park or donating to an Indigenous-led advocacy group. Tonight's event was organized by Year of Uncertainty artists in residence, Alex Strada and Tali Karen, whose exhibition, Proposal for a 28th Amendment, Is It Possible to Amend an Unequal System?, is currently on view in our galleries at Queen's Museum. This exhibition is part of a year-long collaborative experiment called the Year of Uncertainty, which brings together a cohort of 6 artists in residence, 9 community partners, and 12 co-thinkers to investigate strengthening the connections amongst the museum, our communities, and constituents, focused on creating new possibilities of culture, kinship, and mutual support. The program was centered around the 5 themes of care, repair, play, justice, and the future. And it responds to hyperlocal and international states of precarity that have only been heightened by the COVID-19 pandemic, including the crisis of inaction and unaccountability towards racial justice that today's program will also address. Constituting Community, Dreaming and Constitutional Abolition in honor of Trayvon Martin's life is co-presented with New York Magazine and Dream Defenders. And I'm so thrilled to welcome our incredible group of presenters and panelists. With the aim of keeping the flow, I will only very shortly introduce today's presenters, and we will paste their full bios in the chat. Derecka Purnell is a lawyer, organizer, and author of Becoming Abolitionist, Police, Protest, and the Pursuit of Freedom. She works to end police and prison violence by providing legal assistance, research, and training in grassroots organizations through an abolitionist framework. Nyle Fort is a minister, activist, and scholar. He earned his PhD in religion and interdisciplinary humanities, with a concentration in African American studies from Princeton University in 2021. His research addresses issues of race, religion, politics, and activism, and he is currently writing a book on African American mourning with a particular focus on how public acts of grief shape and are shaped by Black politics. Nailah Summers is the communications director for Dream Defenders and is also a founding member of the Florida-based organization. As the communication director, Nailah links the community organizing Dream Defenders does with culture and history to reach a wide range of Black and Brown Florida youth. Lindsay Peoples Wagner is editor-in-chief of The Cut, a premier women's media brand, and co-founder of the Black in Fashion Council. At The Cut, Wagner oversees all editorial content, events, brand extension, and more, conceiving of the strategic direction for the site's next chapter. And finally, Alex Strada and Tali Karen are New York-based artists and educators who are currently Year of Uncertainty artists in residence at Queen's Museum. I will now pass this virtual mic to them to introduce their project currently on view at the Queen's Museum, Proposal for a 28th Amendment. Is it possible to amend an unequal system? Thank you again, everyone, for joining, and welcome, Alex and Tali.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And yeah, thank you, everyone. We're so happy and excited to be here with you today. So hi, my name is Tali Karen, and my pronouns are she, hers. And with me on my screen is my collaborator, Alex Strada. As Catherine mentioned, we are both artists and educators. I teach art in K through 12 public schools in New York City. And Alex is an assistant professor of art at Temple University. Together, we are artists in residence at the Queen's Museum. We're going to begin by sharing the context for this event, which is our multimedia participatory installation currently on view at the Queen's Museum called Proposal for a 28th Amendment. Is it possible to amend an unequal system? We had originally planned with Derecka and Nyle for this event to be in person and to take place in the body of the installation, but to ensure everyone's safety, it was shifted to an online platform. We will begin by playing a video that will hopefully convey the feeling of being in the exhibition space and how people are invited to engage the project's questions. So now we can move on to the next slide and play the video. Thank you. This multimedia participatory installation critically examines the U.S. Constitution and poses two questions. What 28th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution would you propose? And do you think it is possible to amend an unequal system?
Opening with the phrase, "We the people," the U.S. Constitution was written in 1787 by and for wealthy white male property owners, and to date, only 27 amendments have been ratified to change the document.
This legacy and the embedded issues of structural racism, settler colonial violence, heteropatriarchy, climate justice, and labor inequities are illuminated in 6 videos featuring legal scholars.
I want to skip forward just briefly to the 15th Amendment, which is the one we think mostly about with voting. And so we've got 2 sections here. It's a pretty short amendment, and this is what empowered people who had been enslaved from voting. And so it enabled them and gave them the power to vote. So the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Again, this is actually a negative right. This abridged, denied or abridged, means that it prevents other people from preventing folks from voting. So what we're going to do here is take out that distinction on citizenship, and we're also going to take out the negative aspect. So we're going to make it a positive right. So basically we're going to say people, all people in the United States shall have the right to vote. In the United States shall the right to vote. I think we just left United States there.
Central to the installation are sonic soapbox sculptures that emit an in-progress oral archive of responses to the project's questions that have been recorded by past visitors using a recording booth.
I am Jessica. I am nearly 17. I am a senior in high school. If I could propose a 28th Amendment to the Constitution, it would be adding constitutional protection to trans and queer people, especially against trans people, which have been seeing increasing laws criminalizing our existence.
I would propose an amendment to provide equal living and pay for some jobs like Amazon. They make a lot of money, but they pay their workers not so much money, so it's a struggle for them to be able to pay bills. This amendment would directly impact my life in a good way because I also work for Amazon. I understand it's a struggle to be making not so much money for a company that makes a whole lot.
The question, is it possible to mend an unequal system? I think to mend the unequal system would be to invalidate the work of Angela Davis, Ruth Wilson Gilmore, Miriam Kaba, and other folks, and also folks who've been incarcerated who have also said that this system is unmendable. So instead, I would think that this question is a jumping point where we can come together and creatively imagine what a new world can look like outside and beyond the prison industrial complex and the carceral state.
In addition, the installation is activated by a series of public workshops planned with community partners and legal scholars. These gatherings bring people together to collectively consider, question, and debate systematic repair, radical change, and abolition to imagine more equitable futures.
Thank you. So now we can move to the next slide. And as you saw in the video, now I'm on. So as you saw in the video, the central component of the installation are sonic soapbox sculptures that build upon the history of the soapbox as a site of collective struggle and a tool for organizing, while also emphasizing listening, mutuality, and access. So if we had all been together in person, we would have been sitting using the soapboxes for this discussion. And now the next slide.
The intended impact of this work overall is to not only reimagine the Constitution, but to unfix its certainty and point to its embedded oppressive structures. In particular, we want to shed light on the ways that the document has, from its founding and into the present, embodied and perpetuated state-sanctioned racialized violence. One of the legal scholars that we interviewed for the project, David Posen, who is also a professor at Columbia, talks about the difficulties of the legislative process for actually changing the document, let alone the difficulties of understanding it. It's meant to be opaque, it's meant to be illegible. And our aim really as artists is to try and provide a space for voices, especially those omitted from or suppressed by the Constitution, to be heard, and for the law to become more accessible, legible, and changeable. Through the workshops and discussions that we're hosting, such as this, we're interested really in using the installation as a platform to bring people together. And we hope that at the end of this discussion, you'll find time to visit the exhibition if you're available this weekend and contribute to the project's oral archive. And with that, we just want to really thank all of the panelists. We're so grateful to Derecka Purnell and Nyle Fort for their brilliance and generosity in helping us to organize this event. And we're thrilled that Nailah Summers of the Dream Defenders could also join us. The Dream Defenders' incredible transformative justice work is deeply tied to reimagining and fighting for a world without prisons and policing. And this labor began in the wake of the tragic murder of Trayvon Martin, which occurred 10 years ago this month. We're very appreciative of Lindsay Peoples Wagner for her groundbreaking work and the recent issue of New York Magazine that she edited, which honors Trayvon Martin. And we're going to turn now to Nyle Fort and invite him to turn his video on to open up the discussion.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. It is wonderful to be here with you all. I wish we were in person, but I guess we've all gotten used to the Zoom life, so we're gonna make do, as we say in the Black tradition. Before we get started with the actual conversation, because of the nature of what we're talking about, and not just the Constitution, but also a Black life, a Black boy who was brutally murdered. We want to begin this one with a moment of reflection and also with a little bit of setting of the spirit of what we're going to be talking about in this conversation. So if we can just take about 30 seconds and just have a moment of reflection, whether that means you closing your eyes or bowing your head or whatever your practice is of getting into a place where you are honoring not just Trayvon Martin, but this time that we're going to have together. I ask that you do that with us for about 20, 30 seconds. Thank you. Thank you. So now I would, if it's okay, like to start with a passage from Toni Morrison's magisterial text called Beloved. If you read it, you might remember this part. If not, then you're in for a treat. And I just want to use this passage as a way to invoke not only the spirit of Toni Morrison, but the spirit of a long tradition of Black folks who've learned how to tarry with death and dream of a future as we do so. Let me read this passage. After situating herself on a huge flat-sided rock, Baby Suggs bowed her head and prayed silently. The company watched her from the trees. They knew she was ready when she put her stick down. Then she shouted, "Let the children come." And they ran from the trees toward her. "Let your mothers hear you laugh," she told them, and the adults looked on and could not help smiling. Then she said, "Let the grown men come," she shouted. They stepped out one by one from among the ringing trees. "Let your wives and your children see you dance," she told them, and ground life shuddered underneath their feet. Finally, she called the women to her. "Cry," she told them, "for the living and the dead. Just cry." And without covering their eyes, the woman let loose. It started that way, laughing children, dancing men, crying women, and then it got mixed up. Women stopped crying and danced. Men sat down and cried. Children danced, women laughed, children cried, until exhausted and riven, all lay about the clearing, damp and grasping for breath. In the silence that followed, Baby Suggs, holy, offered up to them her great big heart. Here in this place, in this here place, we flesh that weeps, laughs, flesh that dances on bare feet in the grass. Love it hard. Yonder, they do not love your flesh. They despise it. They don't love your eyes. They just as soon pluck them out. No more do they love the skin on your back. Yonder, they flay it. And oh, my people, they do not love your hands. Those they only use to tie, bind, chop off, and leave empty. Love your hands, love them, raise them up and kiss them, touch others with them, pat them together and stroke them on your face, because they don't love that either. But you gotta love it, you. And no, they ain't in love with your mouth. Yonder out there, they will see it broken and break it again. What you say out of it, they will not heed. What you scream from it, they do not hear. What you put in to nourish your body, they will snatch away and give you leave-ins instead. No, they don't love your mouth. You gotta love it. This is flesh I'm talking about here. Flesh that needs to be loved. Feet that need to rest and to dance. Backs that need support, shoulders that need arms, strong arms, I'm telling you. And oh, my people out yonder, hear me. They do not love your neck, unnoosed and straight. So love your neck, put a hand on it, grace it, stroke it, and hold it up. And all your inside parts, that they just as soon slop for hogs. You gotta love them. The dark, dark liver, love it, love it. The beat and beating heart, love that too. More than your eyes or feet, more than that have yet to draw free air, more than your life-holding womb and your life-giving private parts. Hear me now, love your heart, for this is the prize. Toni Morrison. So today we're here to Trayvon's scream, rattling through 10 years of pain and protest, speaking back not only to the violence of a racist vigilante, but the violence of a society built on indigenous genocide, the enslavement of Africans, the colonization of Mexico, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, Hawaii, and Guam, the incarceration of Japanese people in concentration camps, and the vilification of Arabs, Muslims, Jews, immigrants from across the diaspora. But we're also here to celebrate life, even as we ritualize death. So let's remember that Trayvon is not just a symbol of racial violence. He is Sabrina Fulton's baby, who many knew as Slim. Let's remember that a few weeks before he was gunned down, he had celebrated his 17th birthday. His mother, Sabrina, was thinking about her burgeoning teenage boy who was training to become a pilot, getting his driver's license and about to attend junior prom. Trayvon was a playful child. He loved cartoons and adored his mother, who he called Cupcake, because of her sweet, gentle spirit. And it's with that spirit we want to open up the conversation. So at this time, I'm going to bring on Derecka Purnell, who will serve as our moderator, and Nailah Summers and Lindsay Peoples Wagner, who alongside me will serve as the panelists for today's conversation.
Thank you so much for that reading, Nyle. It's every time I hear Toni Morrison's words, I'm just struck by its applicability to a lot of what we're dealing with today, and it's so timely. So I appreciate you setting the setting. Thank you to Catherine at the Queens Museum and to Tali and Alex for your incredible work as artists and for inviting us to this space. Thank you to Lindsay Peoples Wagner for inviting Nyle and I to be contributors to the current issue of the New York Mag. And thank you to Nailah Summers for all of your incredible hard work, organizing, communications, flyness, sweetness, all that you offer to us in this movement. Where to even begin with this conversation? I can't believe that it's been 10 years. I know, Lindsay, when you sent me the email inviting me to be a part of the current issue, I remember the first opening lines, and you wrote something like, I remember where I was. I remember having my hoodie. I remember grabbing my tea. I remember that moment. So I think just as an opening question for each of you, if you could tell me where you were, tell me what you remember about 10 years ago this month, when you first understood what it meant, that name, Trayvon Martin. And I'll start with you, Lindsay.
Thank you all so much for having me. And thank you, Derecka, for writing an amazing cover story. Really killed it there. So, when I was thinking about this idea last year, I'm just always being mindful of what can I do to honor those that have come before us. And I felt like the past few years obviously have been very different as far as this social reckoning and cancel culture and all of these different feelings of people, now, wanting to talk about race in a way that I think they never really did before. But I remember just that feeling of people not taking it seriously enough with Trayvon. I was in college in Iowa, in the middle of nowhere, like very white place in Iowa. And there were only a handful of Black students, who were just trying to figure out what they wanted to do. And a lot of us just had heard about the school online or done a random tour and ended up, liking it enough to go there. And so I remember feeling really upset and like, why isn't anybody mad with me? Why isn't anybody else protesting? Why isn't anybody else, knowing that this is such a big moment and such a tragedy? And we got a couple Black students together. I actually found the picture right before this issue came out, and we all wore hoodies on the steps. And it was, in the middle of Iowa, that's a really big deal to be protesting on the steps. And I think that I just remember it being really painful. And I think now in, having these kinds of jobs and platform, I never want people to forget Trayvon, and I'm really sad that we know who he is because of what happened, but I want people to understand that these things have, forever changed our lives. And I think especially in a lot of the conversations that I've had with the mothers, just honoring them and understanding that, time has really stopped for them, and really just, I think my heart goes out to them in that sense. So.
Thank you for sharing. I know that I was absolutely inspired watching other young people go into the streets, protest. I think a big part of it was the rise of social media at that particular time too. Like I remember getting a text message or an email this was before Charlene Carruthers was like Charlene Carruthers. This was like color change Charlene for like 10 years ago, saying, hey, I see that you have this flyer in Kansas City for a Trayvon Martin rally. Can we put this on our website? And I know that I was especially inspired by, I don't even know if y'all recall the Dream Defenders yet, like at that moment. And so Nailah, I would really love if you talked about, you know, what that moment was like for you individually and what it meant for that version and group that we now know and love called the Dream Defenders.
Thanks, Derecka. Yeah, I too, I was a college student. I was in Gainesville, Florida, at the University of Florida, obviously. And I was in a really peculiar time in my life where I was angry about everything, like already, right? I am from Miami and I fled Miami essentially to the anti-Blackness here, to just really sort of grow up. And so I went to Gainesville, was doing Black studies, Black history, learning more about the civil rights movement. And a few months before Trayvon was killed, I had the privilege to go to the Mississippi Delta with the oral history project at the school. And we learned about SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. We were doing oral histories with like catfish workers. And the pin in that trip for me was there is a very small museum, and I think it's in either Glendola, Mississippi or Indianola, Mississippi. And it's the Emmett Till Museum. And in that museum, you walk through a sort of history of Money, Mississippi. You walk through Emmett Till's family tree. They have a recreation of the Bryant Grocery, right? The storefront where he allegedly, supposedly whistled at this woman. They've got the truck they put him in. They've got, you know, the cotton gin fan. And at the very end, they have a sort of Madame Tussaud model of what he looked like in the casket. And when I tell you I could not breathe, I could not breathe. And I went outside, and I kid you not, a woman walks up to me. She's like, "Are you one of the students that's from that town?" I was like, "Yeah." And she hands me, and I still have it, I don't have it on me right now, but she hands me a postcard, and it has on it, it's Frederick Jermaine Carter. And there's a picture of him hanging from a tree. In 2011, again, a few years before Trayvon, I am seeing a picture of a Black man hanging from a tree in color, Frederick Jermaine Carter. And I just like depressed. I didn't know what to do. I needed to help this mother. I connected with her lawyer. I spoke to her on the phone several times. I tried to organize like a candlelight vigil, and that just like, it wasn't enough. And then Trayvon happened, and I like could not take it. So we started organizing protests on campus. And on March 22nd, which was almost a full month after Trayvon was killed, I get an email from the same professor actually that took me to Mississippi, that there was going to be a conference call for students in Florida that were upset about Trayvon Martin and wanted to do something. And on March 22nd, 2012, that was the initial call that turned into other conference calls that turned into the Dream Defenders. We planned to do a 3-day march from Bethune-Cookman College, which is an HBCU in Daytona, to Sanford, which is where Trayvon was killed. And it was about 40 days after he was killed. And we marched for 3 days. 6 of us blocked the door to Sanford Police Station, demanding that George Zimmerman, right? We weren't abolitionists yet, but we were demanding that George Zimmerman be arrested. And he was arrested 3 or 4 days later. But that was the inception of Dream Defenders. You know, we're an organization that got started by a bunch of really young people that like were heartbroken and wanted to change things. So, yeah.
Wow. Nailah, when you were describing the museum, thank you for giving such vivid imagery. When I was actually researching the piece, I didn't realize like all of the similarities that happened with the murder of Emmett Till and the murder of Trayvon Martin. Like, I didn't know originally that Emmett Till's character was assassinated, right, in the same way that Trayvon Martin was, that some harm that was attributed to his father was used to make sense of why he was this horrible Black boy from up north who came south and didn't know his place. And so I'm just listening to you and you making those connections, and it just sounded so fresh, like, and then having to go back to Florida and here it is, boom, another Black boy is killed. And I think in the same way, so many people make those connections between Emmett Till and Trayvon Martin, because Emmett Till literally defined an entire generation of activism, resistance. Mamie Till Mobley's, her decision to keep the casket open, it's considered a catalyst for the civil rights movement. And in many ways, and I mean, Lindsay, in the issue, there's, this timeline, and we trace the origins or the fruits of the Black Lives Matter movement back to the murder of Trayvon. And Elizabeth Alexander, who's this incredible poet, scholar, she talks about our generation. I think all four of us were in college. She talks about us as being part of the Trayvon generation. So, you were the people who sort of came into activism or some sort of awakening with the murder of this teenage Black boy, and has since seen death go viral with police killings over and over again. And now, in your piece in the issue, you write about the relationship between spirituality and Trayvon's generation. I was wondering if you can talk a bit about that, and knowing like some of the pushback that our activism, this isn't the same civil rights movement that happened after the death of Emmett Till. Something very different happened in the aftermath of Trayvon Martin. I was hoping you can speak to that.
Yeah, thank you. It's very moving, Nailah, what you were talking about. And, it's at like 7 or 8 states up I-95. I actually don't remember where I was when Trayvon Martin was killed, but not vividly, but I do remember when George Zimmerman got the non-indictment. And I was actually at a bar with my friends, and they had it up on the screen, like where you would have a sports game. They had it up on the screen, like CNN or MSNBC. And then the decision came, and I was heartbroken. And it wasn't because I believed in the system, but I guess something in me just thought that this was so obviously racist that, of course, the United States government, the courts, would do the right thing. When they didn't, I went to a friend's house. And I went to my friend's house. He lived in a basement, and we drank like whiskey for most of the night. And I was in seminary at the time. I was getting a master's of divinity degree. And for some people, depending on your religious orientation, you might see something like that and be like, well, you're a minister, you're getting a master's of divinity. But then when this decision comes down, you go to your friend's basement and you drink some brown liquor. I think that experience that I had in certain ways reflects the larger spirituality of Black Lives Matter, the formation that came starting with the Dream Defenders, going through Ferguson till now. And what I mean by that is, on the one hand, the story of the civil rights movement and the church's central role in that. And I want to say story because the actual history is much more complex, it's much more complicated. A lot of Black churches were actually not progressive, not that radical, not with Dr. King. But the story has such a stronghold on how we think about protests, such that the experiences of young people like me, who may even have some kind of spiritual background, because of our orientation to what some might call the secular world, because of our expressions of anger that might come through listening to Tupac, which we did that same night, White Man's World, on repeat the entire night, then that somehow puts us outside of the bounds of what legitimate protest is, but also what legitimate relationship with God is. And so you can't be drinking liquor and listening to Tupac and somehow have a connection to God. But I think what happened in 2012, Trayvon Martin, in 2014, King, Michael Brown, all the way through 2020, we see this eruption, not just of political awareness and consciousness, but of a different spiritual orientation, where a generation of people is saying, you know what, I am deeply connected with God, and that's expressed through my culture and through my protest. And that's something I experienced myself personally.
All right, thank you for sharing. I think calling it an eruption, it shows that there was something underneath that was, boiling, bubbling. I think of a volcanic reaction, right? I think of the lava that's coming out. And Lindsay, earlier you said that you felt that by the time people started realizing recently what was going on with race, it felt too late, right? Because we had been awakened in various capacities, right? I remember growing up and hearing my mom talk about Rodney King, and that was like, in certain ways, each generation sort of has their own person who they were angry over that sort of woke them up or shook them up or confirmed what they already believed. And so in the spirit of eruption, I'm going to ask y'all a question that I asked Ms. Fulton, my interview with her, and it's related to the exhibit that Alex and Tali have around the is it possible to amend an unequal society, an unequal system? And I want to know what makes you angry. Especially, Lindsay, we can start with you. Just again, thinking about your comment that, people are sort of late. Now y'all talking about racial justice, like, in the words of Future, where your ass was at. Like what happened between—
I love a Future quote.
I'm just, wherever I can, I try to invoke the gospel according to Future. And so, I like, what makes you angry about this moment, about what's happened, about what hasn't happened? Very curious about what that's like for you as an editor and someone who is moving across worlds like fashion, justice. I want to know.
I mean, I have a long list of things that make me angry. This is an easy question for me. I think specific to my life, I think people just have such short-term memory nowadays. And I don't know if that's because of social media or I don't know when that really started, but all of this feels very real and visceral to me. And like working on this issue has been, the biggest honor, but it's so heavy and depressing to know that people, I was looking like through the timeline and looking through it, and I'm like, I bet that most people don't even realize half of these names. I think that they probably don't even, they're like, oh, I know, maybe they know Breonna Taylor or they know George Floyd, but they don't even know all of these people, all of these children that have been murdered. And I think that people do a really good job of distancing themselves from things that make them uncomfortable or feeling like, oh, this is only happening in certain places or this isn't as bad as people make it seem. But I remember actually last year, my family is originally from Alabama, and my grandmother passed. And so I was there with my dad, who originally left Alabama because it was too racist and was over it, which is how we ended up in Wisconsin. He literally just drove as far
north.
Went
to the opposite of Alabama.
Yeah. We knew no one in Wisconsin, just literally went as far north. And it was really appalling to me. And I could cry about it, thinking about it. When we were in Alabama last year, some of my cousins were playing around and talking about they wanted to just try to do something fun because we were all just crying and depressed and COVID. And so they're like, oh, maybe there's this place that we can go that's on the state line and closer to Mississippi. And my dad, like, his face just completely changed. And I was like, and I knew that he had feelings about, there were some incidents in his childhood of going to Mississippi, but I didn't think that he still felt that way now. Like I'm 31 years old. I think in my mind, I was like, oh, is he still like having feelings about that? And he took me aside and he's like, baby girl, I know you're a grown woman, but I don't feel comfortable with you going to Mississippi. I've had too many problems there. I don't want you to go. I'm scared for your life. I don't want you to go. And I don't know, to know that my dad still feels that way to this day. I think that people don't understand, like, for Black people, this is real. This is not something that we're making up. This is not something that we're exaggerating. Like, my dad has done everything in the world for me. And for him to say that to me, I don't think people would even realize like how embarrassing that is, and how traumatizing it is. And I think that the anger that I harbor with a lot of the fashion industry is that people, they want to jump in and jump out of being woke. They're not actually committed. They want to post their hashtag or their black square, or, throw some money to an organization. They're not actually interested in infrastructural holistic change. And it sucks because I think that there hasn't really been full investment overall in an industry that really depends so much on Black culture. So.
Wow, I'm so sorry about the loss of your grandmother, and just listening to your dad, it's sad. It reminds me of when Ta-Nehisi Coates writes about the fear of Black parents letting their children fully experience the world in a certain way, and how white supremacy, it can constrict parenting in a way like, I need to keep you safe. I need to figure out how to keep you safe. And it doesn't happen. It doesn't stop once you turn 18 or some arbitrary number. So thank you for sharing that. Just holding your dad close to my heart. Nailah, same question. What makes you angry?
Also a lot. Also so much. I think, I've grown up with this organization. Dream Defenders has changed immensely in the last 10 years. And one of the things that we kept realizing sort of after Mike Brown, after just after every death, right? It's just like, it never felt like it was enough. Being out in the streets, the things that we were asking for never felt like enough. I think in the beginning, Trayvon Martin, we were trying to get at like the school to prison pipeline, which is the reason he was in Sanford, right? Like there was a little baggie in his book bag and he got suspended, so had to go spend time in Sanford. So we were like trying to get at the root of that. So it was like school to prison pipeline is the problem. Then it's like Mike Brown was a child and got murdered, and it was because there was like surveillance of his neighborhood, and right. So it's just like the problem got bigger. So the solution needs to be bigger. And we became abolitionists. We started identifying as a socialist organization because it was just like racism is so big, the mass incarceration is so big, and it just is so pervasive, right? Like I live in Little Haiti in Miami, and there's like no housing. There is no housing anywhere right now. No housing in Miami. I think like South Florida's rent has raised by 50% in the last like 2 years. There's just like, there's nowhere for people to go. And when there's nowhere for people to go, they get more and more criminalized. More and more people end up in jail. More and more people end up homeless, right? And there's just no answer for that right now. And that is, meanwhile, our governor is talking about some Stop Woke Act, trying to make sure that we're not teaching Black history in schools. So there's just, it feels like there is a moment happening right now where like we are fighting on all fronts. We are fighting for the basic necessities of Black people, of people. We're fighting for history in schools while we're fighting for roofs over our heads. And so, that's that it gets me every day. Like I'm still in this work because there's always fighting to be done. And we need more people. We always need more people in this movement, in this fight. And the prospect of getting more and more people involved is what keeps me going. But that everything pisses me off is the short answer.
Yeah, well, something you said really struck with me is you say, it seemed as if no death was ever enough, like that sentence. And you can imagine that when police kill 3 people a day. And Lindsay, I know you said you were going through the timeline and said, I don't think people know most of these names. And even the names in the timeline, right? We're like tens of thousands of names short. It's kind of wild when you think about it. And after George Floyd was killed in 2020, and there were all these reforms, I literally tweeted about it today, 400 bills introduced to reform the police, more money to the police, more civilian review boards. And police have killed even more people. It's like, at what point is it going to be enough to say, hey, you know, we're pouring into a system that has holes at the bottom and everything's leaking. It's not going to be enough. So thank you so much for sharing. Nyle, what makes you angry?
I mean, the first thing is, a lot makes me angry, but I want to start by saying that my anger comes from a deep place of love. I get angry precisely because something that was precious, that I believe is valuable, was lost, was taken, was snatched, was killed, was murdered. And so my love for Black people, my love for my elders, my love for children, my love for people across the diaspora, across the world, kids in Gaza, kids at the border of Mexico, like, my love that I was taught in my church, my little Pentecostal church, you know, that God was about love. And so being shaped that way, it's made me really angry. And because I believe in a theology that's not about, oh, you know, everything happens for a reason because God ordains it that way, and the best thing we can do is make it through this hell in order to get to heaven on the other side. Because I believe in a liberation theology that says that the decisions that people in power have made has structured and made the world not in the image of God, but in the image of capitalists, in the image of those in power, so on and so forth, it makes me angry. And not to be abstract, specifically the fact that Mike Brown had secrets he would never be able to share if he wanted to. The fact that Ayanna Stanley Jones, who was sleeping on her grandmama's couch, won't be able to wake up and watch that cartoon. She really was like, that was her life. Like, I just really want to watch that cartoon. You know, Tamir Rice, just playing at the park, might not be able to figure out what sport he wants to play, right? So the preciousness of these lives, the not abstract, but the concrete preciousness of these lives, a lot of what we don't know, that's why I like reading about them. Trayvon was slim. Right? He loved, you know, cartoons. That stuff matters to me. The other thing that makes me angry, and I was guilty of this at first, was sort of like the idea that because racism is so seemingly so permanent, it's seemingly so powerful that we can't do anything about it. And so we throw up our hands. And I've experienced this. While I've experienced so much protest, 20-something million people on the streets in 2020, so many young people who are fighting back against the system, I've also come across young folks in particular, but people across ages who see racism as so unbeatable that we lift up our hands and say there's nothing we can do about it. And what frustrates me and makes me angry about that is that it's precisely the tradition of resistance that made possible us to even be able to throw up our hands. We wouldn't even be able to have the decision not to fight if other people didn't fight for us to get there. And so, you know, I didn't realize that I was standing in a tradition when I first became an activist in 2011. But 10 years later, looking back, saying, oh, wow, we didn't grow from the ground of the Florida State House in 2012. We didn't grow from the streets of Ferguson in 2014. We grew from the soil of people who revolted, who fled the plantation, who broke the back of Jim Crow, who saved family members from lynching. I mean, so on and so forth. So yeah, you know, just thinking about the preciousness of these lives and thinking about the tradition that we need to keep, you know, standing in to fight against that system.
Wow, thank you for invoking the word tradition and thinking about anger as also animating the things that we can do in response. For people who are watching, if you have questions, this will be a good time to start dropping them in the Q&A or in the chat, but mostly in the Q&A. But Nyle, yes, to your point about, well, that anger, it can animate something. And for Lindsay, I mean, that was a strong indictment against the fashion community, against the art world, is that they treat justice like a season, right? It's like, it's hot right now. I don't know about fall 2023. Like, we got to put something else on the pipeline. So I'm curious, what do you see yourself doing? What do you think other people who are similarly situated as you, who have the power to edit one of the most popular magazines literally in the world, like what do you think is your responsibility to respond differently than the way that you've seen that makes you angry?
I mean, I think that it's my responsibility to go as far as I can and to be as brave as I can with the platform that I have. I mean, I think that like now how you were saying that, you know, a lot of people give up, and it's frustrating to see that. And I've seen so much of that as well, because it can be really frustrating and it can feel like you're saying the same thing. I feel like I've been talking about this forever, and I know I'm not old, but like, I feel like it's like Groundhog Day all the time. And I do think that, it can be really frustrating, I think, especially in the fashion industry, because it is so dependent on Black creatives and so many Black people in the industry actually being part of it, but not really giving us due. And so I often feel really sad when people leave, or just feel like I can't do this anymore. But I personally feel like I haven't earned the right to give up yet. I haven't done enough. I think that there's a lot more to do. And I think that I have to continuously have the audacity to completely refuse and reject what the industry thinks I should be. I am Black in every and all spaces, and I think that's really hard for people to deal with sometimes. But I think that I don't know. I want to see things actually shift, and I know that it just requires a different sense of relentlessness and bravery that a lot of people, I think, just don't want to go there. But I think that it's talks like this and it's things like this that give you a sense of hope that you're not alone in it, because it can be extremely emotionally draining. I've often been told by white people in the industry that I was going to be blacklisted. I remember I was like going out for a job that I really wanted, and the woman told me that, you know, I'm really smart and I'm really, she felt that I was incredibly brilliant, but too radical, and reminded her and too much of some things that Malcolm X would do, even though literally not a negative thing to say to me. But I think that I've taken that all in stride and just tried to stay focused, to be honest, because I think that that's what our ancestors would want us to do. And I want to do the best that I can for them. So.
Wow, beautiful. I haven't earned the right to give up yet. That will preach. Nailah, I want to share a quick story about the Dream Defenders that I hope that you can tell in a way that's much more elaborate. I think it's fascinating that the Dream Defenders occupied the Florida state capitol, and you were doing that to put pressure on the government to change laws, right, in relationship to Trayvon Martin's murder. And when you were constantly refused, how long was the occupation? A month? Like a month-long occupation, right? So y'all are sleeping, singing, organizing, meeting with politicians, trying to get this law changed. Because I'm assuming you think if the law changed, then we should see some sort of reflection in society. And then the law doesn't change. They refuse to meet with you. And y'all did something. It
froze for me.
Yeah, so maybe we can wait for her to come back on, but I can try to step in. I imagine that Derecka wanted to ask you about the relationship between the occupation at the State House, and she might be coming back on. And I'm gonna let her go.
I got that scary, your internet connection is unstable. Am I frozen now?
No, you're good.
Okay. I was saying that I think it's amazing that what y'all did after politicians refused to change this law. and you decided to run your own assembly, right? So can you talk a little bit about that? Why did you all decide to do that? And then secondly, what it meant for you to become an abolitionist organization after after running that mock legislative session yourself?
Yes. So, I think a bunch of us, we had already been an organization for about a year. We had been building chapters all over Florida and college campuses, and everybody had that heartbreak moment. Everybody had the moment where there was whiskey involved. I was in like this crappy little gym at a crappy little apartment complex of my friends, watching it on TV, and the phones start buzzing and the text messages start coming in, and it's just like, this is too much, and this is like, we can't deal with this, right? Like, or we can't just keep going to the streets. This merits something bigger. And so over the next few days, there was this, like, let's go to the Capitol, right? We need to call, it was, we were asking for a special legislative session. Like DeSantis just called one about like COVID, right? It's a thing that legislatures do. We were asking for Trayvon's law to be passed, and Trayvon's law, right, we're baby organization, but Trayvon's law included like police bias training, stopping the school to prison pipeline, a repeal of stand your ground, and one other thing that's not coming to me, but we wanted Trayvon's law, right? Like the governor came and met with us. It was basically like, meh, like, no, we can't really do that. So we occupied for 31 days, 30 nights. Mind you, like these are young Black people staying on the floor on little like padding, like eating pizza every day, finding showers where we can get them. Like, it was hard. And, most days it was like 20 people there. So it was not glamorous. And it was like this really, like, we were putting it all out there. And when it was just like, okay, this isn't shaking out for us, like we've got to put in the work. We said, like, we've got to be the ones that change this state, right? So like one of the things that we did was, when we left, we went and put up an eviction notice on the current governor's office, and we were just like, we are going to register 30,000 people, or I think it was like 50,000 people. And like, that's how much he had lost by. But we were making a promise to the state of Florida that like, this is going to change. And, we were young, hopeful, really trying to get some justice. And that was like the biggest way that we thought that we could do it, right? Like implementing legal change in the state of Florida so that everybody that looked like us, everybody that looked like Trayvon, everybody that looked like the kids that were with us at the Capitol had some sort of like basic protections that we had just been like seeing weren't there for us. And so, yeah, we started making demands and making promises, and it was our first sort of foray into like trying to do some vote work. And yeah.
Yeah, and the second part of that question is just around abolition. You said when we started organizing for George Zimmerman's arrest, we weren't an abolitionist organization. Now we are one. Can you talk about what that means for you and what that means for Dream Defenders?
Yeah. I mean, again, it was like the problem was bigger than these sort of wedges that we were trying to get at. School to prison pipeline wasn't enough because it's not just the kids going to jail, it's our parents and it's our uncles and brothers and neighbors and people that work at the store down the street. It is pervasive, right? It's the way that we are surveilled, the ways that we are criminalized, ways that we are so disposable in so many ways. And especially in a state like Florida, right? We've got the GEO group, which is one of the biggest private prison companies in the entire world. Like, they're getting paid to lock us up. Like, the problem is bigger than these smaller wedge issues. And so abolition, right? Like, we have a project, or it's what we call our North Star, right? This sort of like document of envisioning the country with all the freedoms and all the things that we deserve. And in there is abolition. What if all the money that went to prisons and police and making sure that people are under the boot of this system went instead to resources, went instead to education, went instead to making sure that our communities are thriving? And so it became the like natural next step in the growth of this organization, where it's just like, we cannot continue to prioritize these things and as a country, as a system, and expect any different. If like we are not toppling this thing, if we are not fundamentally changing the way that things operate, like we are going to get the same result, and our people deserve so much better. Like we can't do it. So yeah, I'll leave it there. It was the realization that like the solution is way bigger than any one small issue.
Amazing. Thank you, Nailah. I know I put you on a spot and made you go for a little bit long, but it's very, very important that we understood what you meant by saying about invoking that transition. Nile, what do we do? Like, what should we do? Like, we're exhausted. You said that, well, the reason we're exhausted is because we've been able to keep fighting. We've been able to keep fighting because people were resistant, and we come from that legacy. So what do we do?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have like an exhaustive answer. We answer that question every day in the decisions we make. People are creative and come up with different avenues for us to fight for social change. So, I'll offer a few things that I was taught and that I've experimented with and have been helpful for me. Just want to be clear, though, it's not like an exhaustive list, not a blueprint. It's not red pill, blue pill. If you take the right one, voila, everything changes. But 3 things for me have been very helpful in thinking about social change, political change. One is political education. So, if you don't know the nature of a problem, you can't fix the problem. If you don't know that racism is not a problem, but it's a catastrophe, then you're starting off on the wrong foot. So an analysis of the thing that you're trying to fix or abolish is addition for abolishing or fixing, so on and so forth. So I give the analogy of a car, the old BMW. It looks really nice when I wash it and put the top down. But usually on regular days, it's like something wrong with it. And when something goes wrong with my car, I have to take it to a mechanic because I didn't go to school to fix cars. I went to school for other reasons that don't pay me a lot of money. So I take my car to the mechanic because the mechanic study a car. The mechanic studies a car much more than the average person because they can pop the hood and see what's going on underneath the car. We think about American society or global society like a car. It keeps breaking down. It's running over neighborhoods. The exhaust is just terrifying the planet. And people are, inhaling all of this bad stuff that the car is doing. We got to know how to figure out what's going on underneath the hood. Not just the paint job, not just a flat tire, not just an oil change, but what is going on underneath this hood. And political education helps do that. I've done some political education on this society, this car, and I think that is nothing wrong with the car. The whole car is defunct. It needs to be recalled. It was designed to do this way. But political education, that can happen through books, that can happen through films, that can happen through, town halls. I mean, there's a variety of different ways, but I would say definitely do it collectively. So for me, like political education groups were very helpful. So that's number 1. Number 2 is protest. A lot of bad rep from some people. It's like, that's not, y'all out there kind of rebel rousing. It's not the work. But I would just like friendly remind folks that not anything really significant has changed in this country or around the world without protest. So just the fact that we're here, I teach African. There would be no African departments if it weren't for students in the 1960s organizing and protesting, shutting down presidents' offices, being on campuses, being loud, being noisy to get African American studies departments. But that's the case for the right to vote for women. That's the case for abolition of slavery. That's the case for an 8-hour workday, which we no longer have. Any significant social change started in protest. And the last thing is social movement. And so figuring out, okay, I get the analysis of the problem. I'm doing this with other people so that the things I might not know, we're learning this together. and then going out into the streets, engaging in protests, whether that's a protest that you join that's national or a local protest that you have to help create. And then how do we sustain that energy? How do we take that analysis, put it into motion, into a protest, and the protest into something like a new car that would take us to a new place in society? That's what's called a social movement. And so I just encourage people to use political education, to protest as much as you can, and to join social movements through organizations.
Wow, such practical advice from all of, brave and practical advice from all of you. Thank you so much for sharing. I have a couple of questions between the chat and the Q&A, so I'll ask them really quickly. One of them says, Nailah, the dictatorship in Miami is one of the worst, and the brainwashed brown people are voting against their own interests is historical. Also, the domestic terrorism against any progressive movements and activism. If you're not against Cuba, then you're an enemy. I understand your pain. Thank you for being such an inspiration. I march and my heart is still in pain, but you all give me hope to continue to do the work. So that isn't a question, but it's very affirming. Thank you so much for, well, Nailah, you should be saying thank you. I don't know why I'm saying thank you. It was to you.
I feel that. I will say Miami is a very special place in regard to fighting this fight.
Thank you so much. And then the next one says it feels so overwhelming, exhausting, almost inevitable for the system to change. What are some steps one can take as to what's working to make change? Also want to thank each of you for breaking bread and the means of knowledge. Thank you. So Nile just gave us 3 steps. I think it's political education, protest, and joining social movements. Do you have any other steps to add besides that now before I go to Lindsay?
Just joining a particular organization. So if you're at a college campus and there's a social justice organization, a student activist group, join it. If there's not one, help create it. If you're in a local community and you are a millennial, if there's some group that is already existing, join it. If not, help create it. So joining a particular organization, not just sort of online social movement activism where you subscribe to something or where you share a hashtag, that's not, that can be valuable, but organizing with other people in a local community and linking that up with the social movement. That's all.
Great. Thank you. Lindsay, help us. What are some steps? What we can do? You've done some stuff.
Yeah, but I think if it's specifically writers or people at magazines, I think just having that sense of bravery and not being so timid. I think that there is a lot of repeating of the same narratives or the same stories. And I think that often it can feel like, oh, if I do this story, like, what will people think? Or will it do well? Like you just start to, I feel like, especially with Twitter, kind of writers get in their heads about all of the things that people will say. And I think that you kind of have to have a little bit more quiet time and solitude with yourself to have that conviction and know that you have to, we have to use these platforms to the best of our ability. And I think that's always really important. And going with that conviction, I think, has always kept me on the path that I feel like God is calling me to be on. When I worked at the Cut this last time, before this time, I had come out with a piece about what it's like to be Black in fashion, and a lot of Black people for the first time talking about a lot of really uncomfortable racist things that they had experienced, and calling out certain brands, and really for the first time not feeling afraid of any backlash. And I remember I was so scared when it came out, because so many people had said, like, you're never going to be able to get a job after this. Like, nobody's going to want to hire you. This is just too much. Like, white people don't want to hear this. And I just felt like, if this is the last thing that I do, it's okay, because I felt that strongly about it. And I encourage people, if there are any writers or editors, et cetera, that are in a space like that, to know that it's okay. And when you feel that good about the work, that whether or not people will be disappointed or upset or all of that, I think that it's worth it. So.
You're so young. I was gonna say you've been doing this for a while, which is also true. Like, you just had a lot of success in your career. And what's interesting, thinking about your answers and Nile's answers, Nile is really pushing people to join social justice organizations and to start them. And what's interesting with you is that you're pushing a particular industry, you're pushing a particular field, and how important it is that if there's something that you're excited about, that you're passionate about, whether it's you're a football team or you're a beer club or whatever, you also can use that as a place to like push people. You know, I like freestyling on weekends. I wish I was a part of a freestyle club, but I don't get invited to do that. I get invited to write about social movements and police, but I really wouldn't write about rap. But if I was a part of a freestyle club, I would want to push, like, it would be a space where I would be having conversations and pushing people to be brave and say, hey, you know, we can probably have these conversations better. So I love that both of y'all gave different kinds of answers, depending on your context. And then Nailah, I have a question for you that's also in the chat, which is, what are some strategies for advocating for abolitionist practices and discourse at this time when politics have doubled down on increasing policing and the media attention is so focused on violence?
I think I would also say link up with people, right? I think if you know your city budget and if it's spending like 50% on police and prisons, and you get a bunch of your neighbors and they get a bunch of their family members, and you know, you go after decision makers and say, listen, my kids don't have a park to play in, or the textbooks, you know, whatever it is, like link up with people that are around you and, you know, like, so in many ways, there's all just like free zones. Like, what does it look like to take care of each other? And like, when something wrong happens, or when they're, at the scary internet, but just like, what does it look like to practice caring for your community? What is like, you know, that they can call you if there is something wrong and not involve the police. Like there are many ways to experiment. So you've got to have a sense of yes, experimentation and community, like be embedded, be deeply like grounded in your community, get their numbers, celebrate birthdays, do all the things, right? I think, yeah, that is like organic and sort of really local abolition work, and it can start there.
Thank you for that answer.
Derecka, you got to answer that question too. You know, you wrote the book on abolition, so just want
I'm gonna say read the book, because that's
give us a little knowledge on that one.
Some strategies. Well, a big strategy really depends on where you are, like you all have said, right? It really depends on who you're willing to experiment with and try. I mean, Nailah gave a really interpersonal example that I talk about in the book, you know, building safety networks to the best extent possible. A broader charge for all of us is to push for policies either in our workplace or in Congress that really make sure that people have, you know, resources. So for example, if we cancel student debt, it frees up the kind of decisions that people make, the kind of relationships they want to be in, the kind of jobs they negotiate for, right? When we fight for fully paid paternity leave, it's like, well, now I don't have to go sell my soul to work at like a particular corporation because they have great benefits. I can actually be passionate, right, in any place where I work, because I know if I want to have a child, I'll be supported to go do that. So sometimes these large scale policies, we don't think of them as like abolitionists or life-saving like things, but what they actually do is give people more agency to make decisions about what kinds of relationships they want to be in, who gets to be their partners, right? Who gets to be their employers, who gets to be their workers, it just completely changes. So I think building those interpersonal relationships and making sure that you have a safety plan if something goes down. I think fighting for institutional change, right, within our workplaces, within our society, within our governments, and then being in solidarity with people who across the world who are fighting for the same thing. Right, what we do here directly impacts what happened to people abroad, and what happens abroad impacts like our organizing and activism here. So that's sort of what I talk about in the book and what I try to practice. One of the last questions that I want to ask this group is that I don't think I did a good enough job of really affirming each of you as artists. I mean, now in your dissertation, you write about the politics of African American mourning, but you also have this specific focus on makeshift memorials and the art that comes from the street and how it impacts the way we think about activism. Lindsay, like I said, it feels like you're a mogul or something, but like, because you've done so much in your age. But no, it's really incredible. The organizations that you launched, the people you've been able to work with and shift culture is really, really important. I think that's the work of a visionary. And then Nailah, I mean, the list is too long, but the kind of communications work that you've done with Dream Defenders has really revolutionized what it means to be a part of the Trayvon generation. Like, so many of that campaigns, that messaging, we see it pop up. Lindsay said people are taken from Black culture. A lot of people don't even know a lot of that work is you. And now we're seeing it in ads and we're seeing it with other organizations. And so I would be really curious, as sort of a wrap-up question, what do you think the role of artists in pushing us to have a radical imagination? And I think that's a proper way to close, thinking about Tali and Alex's exhibit, which invite people to share their thoughts and share their ideas in this recorded booth that they have at the exhibit. And I want to know, what's the relationship between our art and our radical imagination for the future that we deserve? And who should I start with this time? Nailah, I'll start with you, then I'll go to Nyle, then I'll go to Lindsay.
Particularly for Dream Defenders, art has always been central to what we produce, how we share stories of like how we see the world. I mean, from like the things that we pass out to people on the street. Art has always been central to that, central to our message. It's how, some of our members even met us, right? Like they see something we designed on the street and are like, yo, like these are my people. So I think art, and especially for the Freedom Papers, right? Also this vision that we have of like the world where people are free, that was articulated through art. It's like, it's on our website, it's everywhere, It allows us a freedom that we don't have inherently. We don't grow up in school typically imagining what the world should look like, right? We get these very narrow parameters about like, maybe I'll grow up and be president, but we don't grow up saying like, just imagining what a future looks like where everybody has what they need, or everybody gets that freedom that you're talking about to like make their own decisions. And so art for us, for our membership, for the people that we talk to in communities, has always been a way of like actualizing that and making it, as imaginary as it is, making it real. You get to put something to paper, you get to write a bar about what it is to be free. Dream Defenders has a mixtape. And it was a project based on like, what does freedom look like, right? But yeah, it's been central to us, and it gives us a freedom to imagine being more free. It imagines, gives us a key to the future. And so, yeah, keep creating art, everybody.
Thank you, Nailah. I think we may have lost Nyle. So Lindsay, I'm gonna go to you if that's okay.
Oh, good. No, I agree with everything that Nailah just said. I think it, it gives you a space to live out, as they say, our ancestors' wildest dreams. And I think that just being able to push things forward, art is such a beautiful avenue for that, to be able to bring forth conversations in both literal and non-literal ways. And I think that it just feels, it also, I think, gives me a sense of joy when we're making a body of work. And I think for so many creatives, they also feel the same way, to create something that lasts longer than you, and that that people will look back on and remember. And so I take that really, really seriously and often think about it.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Nyle, I think you cheated. I think you hopped off so that you can go last. If you needed some more time, I think you could have just asked, but it better be good because now you last. So what's the relationship between art and our radical imagination? Lindsay just shared, I don't know if you heard Nailah's, but Lindsay just shared that creating a body of work that's able to live on and create conversation well beyond you leaving a legacy. Really, she talked about that. And Nailah said something that was really interesting, that when you're a kid, you grow up with this individual idea of like, what was my dream job, but not my dream society. So that was, art helps us to think about how to do that. So what's the relationship for you?
I think art, for me at least, helps me see beyond my current conditions, right? Beyond what's right in front of me. You know, going on Twitter, Instagram, being inundated with bad news just all the time, talking to friends, trying to have a decent day, and they tell you about the next person who was killed by a cop, or the latest, you know, ridiculous decision from the White House, whether it's Democrats or Republicans. Art becomes not an outlet as in an escape from reality, but it becomes a different world within the reality we live in. And so for me, it's about imagination, but not just in some abstract way. It's an imagination that takes flesh in the organizations we talked about, in the social movements we talked about, in the kind of exhibits that Alex and Tali did here, which is just wonderful. And the last thing I'll say is the quotation that inspires me the most when it comes to art. I learned about it through Robin D.G. Kelly's, my favorite historians, his preface to Cedric Robinson's Black Marxism. If you haven't read Cedric Robinson's Black Marxism, highly encourage it. And please read Robin D.G. Kelly's intro or preface to that. In that, he talks about surrealism. And there's this little quote he took from surrealists. They were either in France or Chicago. I know that's a wide range, so I don't want to quote it wrong. But the quote went something like this. Art eliminates the distance between our everyday reality and our wildest dreams. And I love that so much, because so much of what we do is defensive. Oh, you know, here goes the White House, you know, saying they were going to cancel student debt, but, you know, they're rolling back on that. Oh, here, that more money to the police. We got to figure out now. It's always defensive. And art to me is something about making sure that we're, you know, eliminating that distance between the inundation of bad news in our everyday lives and the wildest dreams, where we get to have conversations like this, not about Trayvon Martin's death, but about his life, you know.
Wow, y'all are good. I ain't gonna lie. Those are some good answers right there. I really appreciate all of your time, all of your work, all of your advocacy. Lindsay, Nailah, Nyle, thank you so much for answering my questions and giving us your all. Again, thank you to the Queens Museum for this incredible invitation, to Alex and Tali for eliminating that distance between our reality and our wildest dreams. And I'll hand it back over to you, Catherine.
Thank you so much, Derecka. I mean, just incredibly humbled by all of you. And I just want to basically say thank you for sharing this time with us, all your knowledge and work, and sharing all of those thoughts. It's incredibly meaningful. I also want to thank our interpreters and our attendees for joining today. And as we're closing this out, I just want to invite everyone here to visit the Queens Museum and come experience and participate in Alex and Tali's exhibition, Proposal for a 28th Amendment, Is It Possible to Amend an Unequal System? The exhibition is on view only through this Sunday, February 13th. So if you haven't had a chance to see it yet, please visit the museum this weekend. And last but not least, I also want to encourage you all, if you haven't already, to get the latest issue of New York Magazine, as well as Derecka's book, Becoming Abolitionists, Police Protest and the Pursuit of Freedom. With that, I wish you all a good night, and thank you.
Thank y'all so much. This was wonderful. Everyone have a great night.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.